Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey, and if, like me, you are on a wildcard ahead of Game Week 6 in FPL, then this is the video for you. I'll be running through all of the key information and my favoured wildcard draft at present as we prepare for Game Week 6 and the all-important wildcard chip. In the meantime, if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, that'd be greatly appreciated. For now though, let's crack on with the show. So if you're new around here, what I tend to like to do on a wildcard draft video is take a look at section by section, position by position. So what I'm going to do is start off with the goalkeepers to begin with, then we'll move on to the defence afterwards. So to start off with, I currently have Flecken in goal with Valdemarson, his backup, as the bench keeper. Now, it isn't the position I'm most enamoured with in my wildcard draft at the moment. It is a little bit of a compromise, and if you stay tuned for the rest of the video, I'll go on to explain a different combination, which possibly gives me a slightly stronger goalkeeper combo later on in the show. However, the reason I like this at the moment is it frees up that extra 1 million in goal, and considering Brentford's fixtures over the next few game weeks, I'm actually pretty comfortable with it, and it also obviously lets me make upgrades elsewhere. Now, Flecken in particular hasn't had the best track record as a keeper in FPL since he arrived in the league, but Brentford's defence and their defensive data isn't bad at all. And when you look at the next run of games, it looks pretty strong, and if they're ever going to keep clean sheets, now would be the time. I think there are going to be keepers that outscore him over this run, but not by a significant enough margin that it makes that 1 million extra for the likes of a David Raya worth it. So looking through those fixtures specifically, over the next 8 games, they've got 5 home fixtures. Those home fixtures are all looking really good. Those are against West Ham, Wolves, Ipswich, Bournemouth and Leicester. Good run of 5 home games in the next 8, and the away games aren't too bad either, against Man United, Fulham and Everton. So overall, looking really, really positive, and you would expect a few clean sheets in that patch of games. Now, obviously, David Raya, you'd probably expect a little bit more out of over that run, regardless of the fixtures, but I think you can make up those lost points elsewhere with that extra 1 million saved. And also it means that if there is an injury to Flecken or he loses his place, you do actually have his deputy on the bench, so you're always going to have a playing keeper, obviously, unless lightning strikes twice and they both get injured in the same game. Now, looking beyond that into the defence, it's a really stacked back 3 at the moment with 2 cheaper options on the bench. Now, that back 3, I would imagine play almost every single week, but it's always nice to have a little bit of strength on the bench, and I do have that in the form of Leif Davis. I'll come on to him in a moment's time, but one player that I'm really struggling to go without on wildcard is Trent Alexander-Arnold. Until Game Week 5, he hadn't gotten an attacking return just yet, but he looked very, very likely to do so, and he finally got his reward in Game Week 5. I expect him to continue to get those sort of rewards, and I think the big hauls are on the horizon for him. I'm expecting a very big season from him. The clean sheets are looking more likely than ever before, and when you're adding that into the fact that he is one of the most attacking defenders you could possibly own in the game, and when he does get those clean sheets, when he does get those attacking returns, he's very high on the bonus points too. For me, I think he's definitely worth the money, and even with the fixtures toughening a little bit, I do want him for at least a couple more game weeks, so I don't want to go without him on a wildcard if at all possible. 2 other players that I'm very keen to have are Gabriel and Saliba. Now, that's not specifically because I like them ahead of other Arsenal players necessarily. I do like David Raya, but it enables me a little bit of flexibility down the line, which I'll come onto in just a moment's time. Now, Gabriel obviously looking great from set pieces, but Arsenal in general are very, very good with those attacking set pieces. They've got a great run of games coming with Leicester and Southampton, followed by Bournemouth. Now, that's a great patch of 3. You'd expect them to get quite a few chances from set pieces, and also very likely to be keeping clean sheets in those games as well. Now, that's one reason that I want the double Arsenal defence. The other, specifically in this combination, means that once their fixtures toughen again, I'll put the fixtures on screen now, I can move away from at least one of them, bench the other one maybe for a week or 2, and look at a Porro or a Gvardiol for around the same price, if not a little bit cheaper. So it enables me that flexibility, whereas if I went with Raya, realistically, I'm not going to want to sell a keeper after 2 or 3 game weeks' time, and there aren't any other keepers that would give me the upside that a Porro or a Gvardiol might have. So this route gives me double Arsenal defence for the next 3 game weeks, which I'm really happy with, but also after that, there are easy landing points onto a Porro or a Gvardiol, or perhaps even a Rico Lewis if he gets his place back. Until then, though, I'm very happy with this back three. It is stacked, but if there was any sort of issues, the fact that I've now got Leif Davis on the bench gives me that almost a safety net, I suppose I would call it, where he's got a great run of fixtures. Again, I'll throw them on screen now for you. And because of those fixtures, and because he's got the attacking upside, he's so pivotal to the way that Ipswich build up attacks that almost everything goes through that left-hand side. Leif Davis is absolutely vital to them creating chances, and I think he's been slightly unfortunate not to get a little bit more than he has done so far. I don't expect to ever really have to play him, but having a player with that sort of upside, with great fixtures, and at that price point, I think is better than having someone like a Dunk or a Konza. That's my personal opinion. I prefer the attacking upside defenders, because if they get that attacking return and they luck out with a clean sheet, we're looking at a mega haul. Whereas although Konza scored in game week 5, it is less likely that he's going to go on and continue to do so. And obviously the fixtures for Villa aren't anywhere near as good as Ipswich's. They are a much better team than Ipswich, but I back the attacking upside of Davis. Now, third on the bench is Wout Faes. Now, I don't really ever expect to be playing him, but if there was a real emergency, I think either him or Greaves are absolutely fine. They both look nailed on. They both got a good run of fixtures between now and game week 13, I think it is. However, because I've already got Davis, I didn't want to double up on the Ipswich defence. I prefer to kind of spread my risk a little bit if I did have to rely on him. I don't expect that to happen, but Wout Faes I think is absolutely fine to have as your 5th defender. So moving on to the midfield, and I think we're basically picking from a roster of 7 or 8 very, very good picks for the next run of fixtures if you're on a wildcard this week. I've picked my favoured 5, but not necessarily because I individually think they're the best 5. I just think that the money I save by having certain players within this gives me upside elsewhere. Again, I've got an alternative setup with a couple of different players in it later on, so do wait till the end of the video for that if you want to see a slightly different flavour of draft, especially in the midfield as well. However, I think one player that stays in no matter what is Bukayo Saka. Continues to get attacking returns week on week. I think he's one of the only players remaining who's returned in every single game week now. And his run of fixtures, like with the Arsenal defenders I've talked about already, over the next 3 game weeks, really, really strong. You could always look at transferring him out after that. But again, the fixtures, despite the fact that they are a little bit more difficult, I still don't see why Saka would struggle in them. So you could potentially hold on to him for a bit longer if you wanted to. Now, moving across, Eze is perhaps a little bit of a compromise. I think if I had all of the money in the world, I'd probably upgrade him to one of the other 2 players that I like, but I'm missing out on in this draft. Those 2 players are Luis Diaz and Bruno Fernandes. Now, Bruno Fernandes is a little bit of an outside shout, but the run of fixtures coming is very, very good. And of course, he is on penalties. He will get 90 minutes, and the data, despite being very annoying to own in FPL so far this season, is still looking really good. However, he's not made it into this draft because, to be honest, I think it's gone just a little bit too far down the bad luck path that I'm starting to wonder if it's more about the players around him that mean that he's not able to get those assists or those goal-threatening opportunities as often as we might want a player of his quality to be able to get. Now, that might change very, very quickly, and I will reassess that through the week, but at the moment, he's not in the draft. Eze is, though. Now, his data is still actually very, very good. He's only gotten 1 attacking return so far this season, and a bit like Bruno, has been very frustrating to own. We also know that he's not certain to be on penalties either, especially if Mateta's on the pitch. However, with all of that being said, he's 6.9 million, and for a player of his quality with this sort of underlying data, I still think he is worth the money. If I had a bit more spare, he would be the one player in this midfield 4 or 5, depending whether or not you're playing with that 5th in Rodgers. that I would be able or want to upgrade if at all possible. And again, we'll come on to that a little bit later on. Moving across, Mbeumo is another player that is absolutely locked into my Game Week 6 wildcard as long as he doesn't get injured in training throughout the week. The fixtures are looking good. Mbeumo's on penalties, is very talismanic and should be getting 80 to 90 minutes every single week. Data's great as well. So really, there's not much going against him as a pick right now. He's very well priced. I think for me, he was one of the first players to make it into a draft, and I don't see him exiting anytime soon. Semenyo perhaps is a little bit of a left wing pick, but I think he will prove quite popular on a wild card. At the price, I think he's the best option right now. I think Smith Rowe has really come into contention despite the fixtures not looking too great, because his data's been decent and because he's gotten a couple goals in the last few game weeks. However, I think on balance, Semenyo is more likely to be the player that proves worth the money over the next few game weeks. And obviously, if you've got a space for both of them, I still think they're both good picks. But Semenyo just edges it so far. I think he's slightly more important to Bournemouth than Smith Rowe is to Fulham. I think he's more likely to get more minutes week on week. And I just think he's got slightly more routes to points than Smith Rowe does at the moment. However, it is a very close call, and it's one that for me will probably go down to the wire. Moving across again, Rodgers is currently on my bench for this game week. He does have a good fixture in game week 6 against Ipswich away from home, and I have gone with a very strong front 8 overall. So you could look at starting him in this game week and maybe having a slightly weaker 8th attacker, and that is absolutely valid. I think there are differentials out there like Carvalho, like Tyler Dibbling, that you could potentially have sat on your bench most weeks and have Rodgers as that 7th attacker. However, I have been able to fit him in as a very strong 8th attacker, and there are weeks that Semenyo's got a tough fixture and Rodgers might come into the side. So I'm very happy with that as an option. Overall, I really like my midfield 5. I think Bruno and Diaz are 2 players I'd love to be able to squeeze in. However, I just don't quite have the budget considering where I've used it elsewhere. Speaking of, let's have a look at my forward line, because that's where a bit of my budget has gone. So now to take a look at my forward line. No surprises about Erling Haaland being in there. I think when I started the season, I might have considered having a no Haaland draft at some point on a wild card. However, with the form he's been in so far, there's just absolutely no way I could personally go without him. Anyone who is going without him, fair play, you're braver than me and it might work out. But for me, he's absolutely locked in. He's getting 2 goals a game on average at the moment, and I just don't want to go without one of the best captaincy options week in, week out. However, that being said, he's not currently got the armband for game week 6. That would go to Bukayo Saka against Leicester at home as it stands. However, again, do tune in later on in the week to see whether or not, after a bit more thinking, and obviously the captaincy matrix I put on later in the week, whether or not I change my mind on that. Moving across from Haaland though, one player that I would love to have on a wild card is Dominic Solanke. Now, Solanke himself hasn't gotten off to the best start to life at Spurs so far, but he did look very promising in game week 5. He was dealing with an injury before that, so I think we can kind of give him a little bit of a bye up until now. And the first fixture he played, he was very unlucky not to return as well before the injury. So I do really like him. I think Spurs will create a lot of chances for him, and we did see that in game week 5 as well. And Solanke's run, as you can see on screen now, is looking fairly positive for quite a long period of time as well. So I do like him a lot as an option at this price point. However, again, I will talk about one downgrade I could make to Solanke that would allow me a little bit extra money elsewhere and upgrade a couple of other positions. So do tune in for that in just a moment's time. After Solanke, the final spot in the 15 would go to Chris Wood. Now, I was going to make this video earlier in the day. I'm recording on Sunday later in the day. If I'd been making it before the 2 p.m. kickoff, this spot could have gone to Calvert-Lewin or perhaps João Pedro. But Chris Wood, being now on penalties for Nottingham Forest, has just about persuaded me that I think it's worth going for him over the other 2 right now. Now, Dominic Solanke has a great run of fixtures. I'll go into that in a moment's time. But Chris Wood, over the next 5, also has a great run with 4 of the next 6 at home. I think he's a good bet on a wild card. He's still very cheap, 6.1, 6.2 million. And also, the minutes have looked much better than I thought they might be at the start of the season. The fact that he's on penalties is kind of the cherry on top of the cake that I think just about swings me towards having Chris Wood over the other two right now. Obviously, before this, the other two would have had penalties and not Chris Wood. However, now that kind of levels him out with the other two. I think the fact that he's got a great run of fixtures and the data's looking pretty strong as well, just about persuades me to go for him over the other two right now. However, I do still like Calvert-Lewin. I do quite like João Pedro still. Obviously, he's had the injury though, so we do have to monitor his minutes for the next week or so. I'd be surprised if he doesn't come back into the starting 11 in Game Week 6, and that is something that I'll think about more during this week when making my final wildcard selection. So as promised, here is an alternative wildcard draft that I do really like the look of, and let me know in the comments below whether you prefer this setup or the one I've just shown you. There are 4 differences between the last wildcard and this one. Those 4 differences are I've upgraded Flecken to Raya, so I still have double Arsenal defence, but I've taken out Saliba and put in Porro from the off. That is because I really like Porro, even from Game Week 6, despite the fact it's away at Man United. I think he's got enough upside as a defender that he's kind of a bit of a cheat code, and I would love to squeeze him in, if at all possible. I'd probably be looking at transferring him in a couple of game weeks anyway. This is just an easier way to get to him from the off. The other upgrade I've been able to make is Eze to Diaz. Now, Diaz, again, I've discussed already a little bit. I do really like the look of. I'm a little bit nervous on minutes because he gets taken off early most matches. But with the form he's in at the moment, even if he's getting 65, 70 minutes a match, that might still be enough to make him a really decent pick. And honestly, I'd probably be looking at holding on to him for maybe 2 or 3 game weeks and then looking to see who the next hot thing in midfield is at that point in time. For now, though, Diaz just looks maybe too good to ignore. And for that extra 1 million over the likes of Eze, it could be worth the upside. Liverpool obviously looking at creating a lot of chances at the moment, and historically it's gone further down the right-hand side than it has the left-hand side. But it's looking like a real 50-50 split at the moment, and Diaz is getting just as many clear-cut opportunities as Salah is, so it could be an easy route into the Liverpool attack that maybe I was underestimating until this point. Now, with all of those upgrades, I do have to make one other downgrade, and that downgrade is to get rid of Dominic Solanke and bring in another cheaper forward, that being Dominic Calvert-Lewin at the moment. Now, Calvert-Lewin's a player I've discussed a little bit over the last couple of game weeks as a differential, and this would be a little bit of a leap of faith to bring him in at this point, but it is worth noting the fixtures for Everton for over a pretty long period of time are absolutely fantastic now. Hopefully on screen if I've edited this correctly. And Dominic Calvert-Lewin himself has looked a lot fitter, a lot sharper, and a lot more effective in front of goal, leading the line for Everton than we saw last season. So whilst it is a downgrade, I think there's possibly an argument to be made that the upgrades that I'm making elsewhere slightly outweigh this downgrade. You're gaining a penalty taker in Calvert-Lewin that we're not assuming that Solanke's going to be for Spurs. We're probably guessing that it'll be Heung-min Son still. So you're gaining penalties. He's still not looking too bad on the eye test, whereas Dominic Solanke, I would say, is better, but how much better would be the key question here at this point in time. So let me know in the comments below whether or not you think the 4 changes I've made with this alternative wildcard are worth making, or whether you'd stick with my preferred wildcard, which is what I showed just before this section. As we reach the end of the video, I would really appreciate it if you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And as I prepare more heavily for the Game Week 6 wildcard before the end of the week, do make sure you tune into my next video where hopefully I've done a little bit more thinking and I'm a little bit closer to locking in on that Game Week 6 wildcard.